committee found that the executive has used the CIA to conduct covert operations because it is less accountable than other government agencies. In this regard, Secretary of State Henry Kissinger told the committee, "I do not believe in retrospect that it was good national policy to have the CIA conduct the war in Laos. I think we should have found some other way of doing it, and to use the CIA simply because it is less accountable for very visible major operations is poor national policy, and the covert activities should be confined to those matters that clearly fall into a gray area between overt military action and diplomatic activities, and not to be used simply for the convenience of the executive branch and its accountability." Footnote 35. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 35. Henry Kissinger testimony, November 21st, 75, page 54. Resuming the reading. Under questioning, Secretary Kissinger went on to say that in Laos there were two basic reasons why the CIA was used to fight that war. Quote, "One, to avoid a formal avowal of American participation there for diplomatic reasons, and the second, I suspect, because it was less accountable." End quote. Footnote 36. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 36. IBID, page 56. Resuming the reading. The committee has found that the temptation of the executive to use covert action as a, quote, "convenience," end quote, and as a substitute for publicly accountable policies has been strengthened by the hesitancy of the Congress to use its powers to oversee covert action by the CIA. Much of this hesitancy flowed from the legitimate desire on the part of congressional oversight committees to maintain the security of covert action projects. But it also resulted from a reluctance on the part of the appropriate committees to challenge the president or to become directly involved in projects perceived to be necessary for the national security. Congressional hesitancy also flowed from the fact that congressional oversight committees are almost totally dependent on the executive for information on covert operations. The secrecy needed for these operations allowed the executive to justify the limited provision of information to the Congress. 5. Maintaining a covert capability. Former senior government officials have testified to their concern that the use and control of covert action is made more difficult by a strong activism on the part of CIA operational officers. McGeorge Bundy, a former special assistant for national security affairs to Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, has stated, "While in principle, it has always been the understanding of senior government officials outside the CIA that no covert operations would be undertaken without the explicit approval of, quote, higher authority, end quote. There has also been a general expectation within the agency that it was its proper business to generate attractive proposals and to stretch them in operation to the furthest limit of any authorization actually received." Footnote 37. Reading footnote 37. McGeorge Bundy testimony, House Select Committee on Intelligence, December 10, 75, hearings, Volume 5, page 1794 to 1795. End of page 161, beginning page 162. Clark Clifford, in his testimony before the Select Committee, reinforced this view. On a number of occasions, a plan for covert action has been presented to the National Security Council, and authority requested for the CIA to proceed from point A to point B. The authority will be given and the action will be launched. When point B is reached, the persons in charge feel that it is necessary to go to point C, and they assume that the original authorization gives them such a right. From point C, they go to D, and possibly E, and even further. This led to some bizarre results, and when investigation is started, the excuse blandly presented that the authority was obtained from the National Security Council before the project was launched. Footnote 38. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 38. Clark M. Clifford testimony, December 5th, 75. Hearings, Volume 7, pages 51 to 52. Resuming the reading. Activism referred to by Bundy and Clifford is reflected in part in the maintenance of a standing covert capability and a worldwide, quote, infrastructure, end quote. The committee found that one of the most troublesome and controversial issues it confronted in evaluating covert action was the question of the utility and propriety of the CIA's maintaining a worldwide, quote, infrastructure, end quote, e.g., agents of influence, assets, and media contacts. Are these, quote, assets, end quote, essential to the success of a major covert action program, or does this standby capability generate a temptation to intervene covertly as an alternative to diplomacy? There is no question that the CIA attaches great importance to the maintenance of a worldwide clandestine infrastructure, the so-called, quote, plumbing, end quote, in place. During the 1960s, the agency developed a worldwide system of standby covert action, quote, assets, end quote, ranging from media personnel to individuals said to influence the behavior of governments. Footnote 39. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 39. During its assassination inquiry, the committee found that certain CIA assets with the cryptonyms QJ/WIN, WI/ROGUE, and AM/LASH were involved or contemplated for use in plots to assassinate foreign leaders. Resuming the reading. In recent years, however, the agency has substantially reduced its overseas covert action infrastructure, even to the point of closing bases and stations. A limited infrastructure is still maintained, however. For example, although the United States has no substantial covert action program in the Western Hemisphere today, the CIA does continue to maintain a modest covert action infrastructure consisting of agents of influence and media contacts. The CIA's infrastructure is constructed in response to annual operating directives. These directives set station priorities for both clandestine collection and covert action. Footnote 40. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 40. For example, the Chilean Operating Directive for FY 1972 directed the Santiago station to, quote, sponsor a program which will enable the Chilean armed forces to retain their integrity and independent political power, provide direct financial support to key military figures who can be expected to develop a meaningful following in their respective services to restrain and perhaps topple the Allende government, end quote. The Select Committee found no evidence to indicate that this, quote, direct financial support, end quote, was provided. Resuming the reading. The operating directives are developed and issued by the CIA and informally coordinated with concerned CIA geographic bureaus and the Department of State. Therefore, the infrastructure that is in place at any given time is there at the direction of the CIA. The committee finds several troublesome problems with the CIA's development and maintenance of covert action infrastructures. End of page 162, beginning page 163. Throughout the world. 1. The operating decisions are made by the CIA. Although infrastructure guidelines are cleared with the State Department, the agency's operating directives are rarely seen outside the CIA. And 2. The actual covert action projects which build and maintain these infrastructures rarely, if ever, go to the National Security Council for approval. The committee finds that the independent issuance of operating directives and the fact that most covert action projects, which establish and maintain the CIA's infrastructure around the world, do not go to the National Security Council, combine to shield this important clandestine system from effective policy control and guidance. The committee believes that all small, so-called, quote, non-sensitive, end quote, projects, which do not now go to the National Security Council level for approval, should at a minimum be aggregated into appropriate country or regional programs, and then brought to the National Security Council level for approval. Covert action should be the servant of policy. Secretary Kissinger made this point before the committee when he testified. If the diplomatic track cannot succeed without the covert track, then the covert track was unnecessary and should not have been engaged in. So hopefully, if one wants to draw a general conclusion, one would have to say that only those covert actions can be justified that support a diplomatic track. Footnote 41. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 41. Henry Kissinger testimony, November 21st, 75, page 38. Resuming the reading. 6. Conclusions. Given the open and democratic assumptions on which our government is based, the committee gave serious consideration to proposing a total ban on all forms of covert action. The committee has concluded, however, that the United States should maintain the option of reacting in the future to a grave, unforeseen threat to United States national security through covert means. The Hughes-Ryan Amendment to the 1974 Foreign Assistance Act restricts the CIA from undertaking, quote, operations in foreign countries, other than activities intended for obtaining necessary intelligence, unless and until the President finds that each such operation is important to the national security of the United States, end quote. Footnote 42. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 42. See page 151 for full text of Hughes-Ryan Amendment. Resuming the reading. The committee has concluded that an even stricter standard for the use of covert action is required than the injunction that such operations be, quote, important to the national security of the United States, end quote. The committee's review of covert action has underscored the necessity for a thoroughgoing strengthening of the executive's internal review process for covert action and for the establishment of a realistic system of accountability, both within the executive and to the Congress and to the American people. The requirement for a rigorous and credible system of control and accountability is complicated, however, by the shield of secrecy which must necessarily be imposed on any covert activity if it is to remain covert. The challenge is to find a substitute for the public scrutiny going through congressional debate and press attention that normally attends government decisions. In its consideration of the present processes of authorization and review, the committee has found the following. End of page 163, beginning page 164. 1. The most basic conclusion reached by the committee is that covert action must be seen as an exceptional act, to be undertaken only when the national security requires it and when overt means will not suffice. The committee concludes that the policy and procedural barriers are presently inadequate to ensure that any covert operation is absolutely essential to the national security. These barriers must be tightened and raised, or covert action should be abandoned as an instrument of foreign policy. 2. On the basis of the record, the committee has concluded that covert action must in no case be a vehicle for clandestinely undertaking actions incompatible with American principles. The committee has already moved to condemn assassinations and to recommend a statute to forbid such activity. It is the committee's view that the standards to accept covert activity should also exclude covert operations in an attempt to subvert democratic governments or provide support for police or other internal security forces which engage in the systematic violation of human rights. 3. Covert operations must be based on a careful and systematic analysis of a given situation, possible alternative outcome, the threat to American interests of these possible outcomes, and above all, the likely consequences of an attempt to intervene. A former senior intelligence analyst told the committee, "Clearly, actions were taken on the basis of some premises, but they seem not to have been arrived at by any sober and systematic analysis, and tended often, it appeared, to be simplistic and passionate. In fact, there was often little or no relationship between the view of world politics as a whole, or of particular situations of threat held by operators on the one hand, and analysts on the other. The latter were rarely consulted by the former, and then only in partial, disingenuous, and even misleading ways. It says something strange about successive directors of Central Intelligence that they allowed this bifurcation, even contradiction, to obtain." Footnote 43. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 43. John Hui Senga, Testimony, January 26, 76, page 6 to 7. The committee found in its case study of Chile that there was little or no coordination between the intelligence analysts and the covert operators, especially in politically sensitive projects, which were often restricted within the clandestine service and the 40 Committee. The project files for Chile gave no indication of consultation with the Intelligence Directorate from 1964 to 1973. The exclusion of expert analytic advice extended to the Director of Central Intelligence's staff responsible for preparing national intelligence estimates. Today, however, the Deputy Director for Intelligence, DDI, is informed by the DDO of new covert activities. The DDI has an opportunity to comment on them and offer recommendations to the Director of Central Intelligence, but he is not in the formal approval process. Resuming the reading. The committee has concluded that bringing the analysts directly into the formal decision process would be a partial remedy to the problem of relating analysis to operations. More important, it would be the insistence of the Director of Central Intelligence that the political premise of any proposed covert operation be rigorously analyzed. 4. The committee also concludes that the appropriate National Security Council committee, e.g., the Operations Advisory Group, should review every covert action proposal. The committee also holds strongly to the view, end of page 164, beginning page 165, that the small, non-sensitive covert action proposals, which in the aggregate establish and maintain the agency's covert infrastructure around the world, should be considered and analyzed by the appropriate NSC Committee. The committee also believes that many of the small covert action proposals for projects would fall away when forced to meet the test of being part of a larger covert action operation in support of the openly avowed policies of the United States. 5. With respect to the congressional oversight of covert action, the committee believes that the appropriate oversight committee should be informed of all significant covert operations prior to their initiation, and that all covert action projects should be reviewed by the committee on a semi-annual basis. Further, the Oversight Committee should require that the annual budget submission for covert action programs be specific and detailed as to the activity recommended. Unforeseen covert action projects should be funded only from the Contingency Reserve Fund, which could be replenished only after the concurrence of the Oversight and any other appropriate congressional committees. The Legislative Intelligence Oversight Committee should be notified prior to any withdrawal from the Contingency Reserve Fund. End of page 165. Beginning page 166. 9. CIA Counterintelligence. A. Counterintelligence, an introduction. 1. Definition of counterintelligence. Counterintelligence, CI, is a special form of intelligence activity, separate and distinct from other disciplines. Its purpose is to discover hostile foreign intelligence operations and destroy their effectiveness. This objective involves the protection of the United States government against infiltration by foreign agents, as well as the control and manipulation of adversary intelligence operations. An effort is made to both discern and deceive the plans and intentions of enemy intelligence services. Defined more formally, counterintelligence is an intelligence activity dedicated to undermining the effectiveness of hostile intelligence services. Its purpose is to guard the nation against espionage, other modern forms of spying and sabotage directed against the United States, its citizens, information and installations at home and abroad, by infiltrating groups engaged in these practices, and by gathering, storing, and analyzing information on inimical clandestine activity. Footnote 1. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 1. Counterintelligence may also be thought of as the knowledge needed for the protection and preservation of the military, economic, and productive strength of the United States, including the security of the government in domestic and foreign affairs against or from espionage, sabotage, and all other similar clandestine activities designed to weaken or destroy the United States. Report of the Commission on Government Security, Washington, D.C., 1957, pages 48 to 49. Resuming the reading. In short, counterintelligence specialists wage nothing less than a secret war against antagonistic intelligence services. Quote, in the absence of an effective U.S. counterintelligence program, end quote, notes a counterintelligence specialists, quote, in brackets, adversaries of democracy, end brackets, function in what is largely a benign environment, end quote, footnote 2. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 2. Staff summary of interview, FBI counterintelligence specialists, May 8th, 75. Resuming the reading. 2. The threat. The adversaries of democracy are numerous and widespread. In the United States alone, 1,079 Soviet officials were on permanent assignment in February 1975, according to FBI figures. Footnote 3. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 3. Staff Summary of Interview, FBI Counterintelligence Specialist, March 10, 75. Resuming the reading. Among these, over 40% have been positively identified as members of the KGB, or GRU, the Soviet civilian and military intelligence units. Conservative estimates for the number of unidentified intelligence officers raised the figures to over 60% of the Soviet representation. Some defector sources have estimated that 70% to 80% of Soviet officials have some intelligence connection. Footnote 4. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 4. FBI Counterintelligence Specialist, Staff Summary, March 10, 75. Resuming the reading. Furthermore, the number of Soviets in the United States has tripled since 1960 and is still increasing. Footnote 5. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 5. FBI Counterintelligence Specialist, Staff Summary, May 8, 75. Resuming the reading. The opening of American deep water ports to Russian ships in 1972 has given Soviet intelligence. End of page 166, beginning page 167. Services, quote, virtually complete geographic access to the United States, end quote, observes a counterintelligence specialist. Footnote 6. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 6. IBID. Resuming the reading. In 1974, for example, over 200 Soviet ships with a total crew complement of 13,000 officers and men called at 40 deep water ports in this country. Various exchange groups provide additional opportunities for Soviet intelligence gathering within the United States. Some 4,000 Soviets entered the United States as commercial or exchange visitors in 1974. During the past decade, the FBI identified over 100 intelligence officers among the approximately 400 Soviet students who attended American universities during this period as part of an East-West student exchange program. Footnote 7. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 7. IBID, March 10, 75. Resuming the reading. Also, in the 14-year history of this program, more than 100 American students were the target of Soviet recruitment approaches in the USSR. Other areas of counterintelligence concern include the sharp increase in the number of Soviet immigrants to the United States, less than 500 in 1972 compared to 4,000 in 1974. The rise in East-West commercial exchange visitors from 641 in 1972 to 1,500 in 1974, and the growing number of Soviet bloc officials in this country, from 416 in 1960 to 798 in 1975. Footnote 8. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 8. IBID. Resuming the reading. Foreign intelligence agents have attempted to recruit not only executive branch personnel, but also congressional staff members. The FBI has advised the committee that there have been instances in the past where hostile foreign intelligence officers have used the opportunity presented by overt contacts to attempt to recruit members of congressional staffs who might have access to secret information. Footnote 8a. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 8a. FBI Memorandum for the Record, October 30, 75. Such recruitment approaches have been reported to the FBI by congressional staff members. If the FBI otherwise learns of such recruitments, its policy is to report the facts to the appropriate members of Congress. Resuming the reading. The most serious threat is from, quote, illegal, end quote, agents who have no easily detectable contacts with their intelligence service. The problem of, quote, illegals, end quote, is summarized by the FBI as follows. The illegal is a highly trained specialist in espionage tradecraft. He may be a brackets foreign and brackets national and or a professional intelligence officer dispatched to the United States under a false identity. Some illegals brackets may be in brackets trained in the scientific and technical field to permit easy access to sensitive areas of employment. The detection of illegals presents a most serious problem to the FBI. Once they enter the United States with either fraudulent or true documentation, their presence is obscured among the thousands of legitimate emigres entering the United States annually. Relatively undetected, they are able to maintain contact with brackets, the foreign control and brackets, by means of secret writing, microdots, and open signals in conventional communications, which are not susceptible to discovery through conventional investigative measures. Footnote 8b. Reading footnote 8b. FBI memorandum, quote, intelligence activities within the United States by foreign governments, end quote. March 2075. End of page 167, beginning page 168. In several instances, the FBI accomplished this most difficult assignment by carefully designed and limited mail opening programs, which, if they had been done authorized by a judicial warrant, might have been entirely proper. It is most unfortunate that the FBI did not choose to seek lawful authorization for such methods. Footnote 8c. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 8c. Testimony of W.R. Wanal, Assistant Director, FBI, October 21st, 75, page 5. See report on CIA and FBI mail opening. Resuming the reading. This brief summary of the threat facing the American Counterintelligence Corps in this country is troubling enough, yet it does not take into account the worldwide scope of the problem. As an FBI counterintelligence expert states, hostile foreign intelligence services are alert for operational opportunities against the United States, whether they occur within this country, abroad, in other countries, or in the home country itself. An operation might begin in the home country with recruitment of an American visitor, transferred to the United States with his return, and again, even later, might be transferred to a third country where the American agent may be met outside the normal reach of United States counterintelligence coverage. Regardless of the geographical location, the operation is still directed against the United States and can cause just as much damage from abroad as within our own borders. Footnote 9. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 9. FBI Counterintelligence Specialist Staff Summary, March 10, 75. Resuming the reading. The espionage activities of the Soviet Union and other communist nations directed against the United States are extensive and relentless. Footnote 9a. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 9a. See Appendix 3, Soviet Intelligence Collection and Operations against the United States. Resuming the reading. To combat this threat, American counterintelligence officers have developed various sophisticated investigative techniques to 1. Obtain information about foreign intelligence services. 2. protect our intelligence service, and 3. Control the outcome of this subterranean struggle for intelligence supremacy. The task is difficult technically and raises sensitive legal and ethical questions. As the CIA Deputy Director for Operations has testified, the U.S. counterintelligence program, to be both effective and in line with traditional American freedoms, must steer a middle course between blanket, illegal, frivolous, and unsubstantiated inquiries into the private lives of U.S. citizens and excessive restrictions which will render the government's counterintelligence arms impotent to protect the nation from foreign penetration and covert manipulation. Footnote 10. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 10. William Nelson testimony, January 28th, 76, page 5. Resuming the reading. 3. Counterintelligence as product. Information about, quote, the enemy, end quote. Counterintelligence is both an activity and its product. The product is reliable information about all the hostile foreign intelligence services who attack the United States by stealth to guard against hostile intelligence operations aimed at this nation. A vast amount of information is required. It is necessary to know the organizational structure of the enemy service, the key personnel, the methods of recruitment and training, and the specific operations. This information must be gathered within the United States and in all foreign areas to which United States interests extend. Within the intelligence, end of page 168, beginning page 169, service. This acquisitive activity is referred to as intelligence collection. The resulting product, pertinent information on the enemy intelligence service, is often called, quote, raw, end quote, intelligence data. The efforts of intelligence services through the world to conceal such information from one another through various security devices and elaborate deceptions creates the counterintelligence specialist, what James Angleton, former chief of CIA counterintelligence, calls a kind of, quote, wilderness of mirrors, end quote. 4. Counterintelligence as activity. Security and counter-espionage. As an activity, counterintelligence consists of two matching halves, security and counter-espionage. Security is the passive or defensive side of counterintelligence. It consists basically of establishing static defenses against all hostile and concealed acts, regardless of who carries them out. Counter-espionage, CE, is the offensive or aggressive side of counterintelligence. It involves the identification of a specific adversary and a knowledge of the specific operation he is conducting. Counter-espionage personnel must then attempt to counter these operations by infiltrating the hostile service, called penetration, and through various forms of manipulation. Ideally, the thrust of the hostile operation is turned back against the enemy. The security side of counterintelligence includes the screening and clearance of personnel and the development of programs to safeguard sensitive intelligence information. That is, the proper administration of security controls. The intelligence services try to defend three things. 1. Their personnel. 2. Their installations. And 3. Their operations. At the Central Intelligence Agency, the Office of Security is responsible for protection of personnel and installations, while actual operations are largely the preserve of the counterintelligence staff and the operating divisions. Among the defensive devices used for information controlled by intelligence agencies throughout the world are security clearances, polygraphs, locking containers, security education, document accountability, censorship, camouflage, and codes. Devices for physical security include fences, lighting, general systems, alarms, badges, and passes, and watchdogs. Area control relies on curfews, checkpoints, restricted areas, and border frontier control. Footnote 12. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 12. Summary of interview, CIA Security Specialist, August 1975. Resuming the reading. Thus, the security side of knowing everything you have to know about your own, thus the security side of counterintelligence, quote, is all that concerns perimeter defenses, badges, knowing everything you have to know about your own people, end quote. The counterespionage side, quote, involves knowing all about intelligence services, foreign intelligence services, their people, their installations, their methods, and their operations, so that you have a completely different level of interest, end quote. Footnote 13. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 13. Raymond Roca Disposition, November 25th, 75, page 19. Resuming the reading. However, the Office of Security and the Counterintelligence Staff exchange information to assure adequate security systems. 5. The penetration and the double agent. Several kinds of operations exist within the rubric of counterespionage. One, however, transcends all the others in importance: the penetration. The primary goal of counterintelligence is to contain the intelligence service of the enemy. To do so, it is eminently desirable to, end of page 169, beginning page 170, know his plans in advance and in detail. This admirable but difficult objective may be achieved through a high-level infiltration of the opposition service. As a director of the CIA has written, quote, experience has shown penetration to be the most effective response to Soviet and bloc (intelligence and services), end quote. Footnote 14. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 14. Memorandum from John McCone to Chairman, President's Foreign Intelligence Advisory Board, October 8, 63. Resuming the reading. Moreover, a well-placed infiltrator in a hostile service may be better able than anyone else to determine whether one's own service has been penetrated. A former director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, DIA, has observed that three principal programs used by the United States to meet, neutralize, and defeat hostile intelligence penetrations are: 1. Our own penetrations. 2. Security screening and clearance of personnel. And 3. Our efforts for safeguarding sensitive intelligence information. Footnote 15. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 15. The Carroll Report on the Dunlap Case, February 12, 64. Resuming the reading. The importance of the penetration is emphasized by an experienced CIA counter-espionage operative, with mixed but expressive similes. Quote, conducting counter-espionage with penetration can be like shooting fish in a barrel, end quote. In contrast, quote, conducting counter-espionage without the act of penetration is like fighting in the dark, end quote. Footnote 16. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 16. CIA/Counterintelligence Specialist, Staff Summary, November 1st, 75. Resuming the reading. Methods of infiltrating the opposition service take several forms. Usually the most effective and desirable penetration is the recruitment of an agent in place. Footnote 17. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 17. CIA/counterintelligence specialist. Staff summary. October 1775. Resuming the reading. He is a citizen of an enemy nation and is already in the employ of its intelligence service. Ideally, he will be both highly placed and venal. The individual, say a KGB officer in Bonn, is approached and asked to work for the intelligence service of the United States. Various inducements, including ideology, may be used to recruit him against his own service. If the recruitment is successful, the operation may be especially worthwhile, since the agent is presumably already trusted within his own organization, and his access to documents may be unquestioned. Jack E. Dunlap, who has worked at and spied on the National Security Agency, NSA, in the 1960s, is a well-known example of a Soviet agent in place within the United States Intelligence Service. His handler was a Soviet Air Force attaché at the Soviet Embassy in Washington. Of course, a single penetration can be worth an intelligence goldmine, as it were Kim Philby for the Soviet Union and Colonel Oleg Penkovsky for the United States. Another method of infiltration is the double agent. Double agents, however, are costly and time-consuming, and they are risky. Human lives are at stake. Double agents also normally involve pure drudgery with few dramatic results, as new information is checked against existing files. On top of this comes the difficulty of assuring against a double cross. Moreover, passing credible documents can be a major problem. The operations must be made interesting to the opposition. To make fake papers plausible, the genuine article must be provided now and again. Classified documents must be cleared, and this process can be end of page 170, beginning page 171. Painstakingly slow. Also, quote, this means letting a lot of good stuff go to the enemy without much in return, end quote, complains a counterintelligence officer with considerable experience. Footnote 18. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 18. Roca Disposition, November 25th, 75, pages 33 to 34. Resuming the reading. To accomplish each of these tasks, hard work, careful planning, and considerable manpower are necessary. The extraordinary manpower requirements of the double agent operation restricted the abilities of the British to run cases during the Second World War. Approximately 150 double agents for the entire period of the war, and no more than about 25 at any one time. Footnote 19. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 19. Sir John Masterman, Double Cross System of the War of 1939 to 45. New Haven, Yale University Press, 1972. Resuming the reading. Moreover, their mission was eased greatly by the ability of the British to read the German cipher throughout most of the conflict. 6. The defector. Almost as good as an agent in place, and the less troublesome than the whole range of double agents, is the, quote, defector with knowledge, end quote. Here, the procedure consists of interrogation and validation of bona fides as usual, but without the worrisome ongoing requirements for a skillful mix of false and genuine documents and other logistical support. Though an agent in place is preferable because of the continuing useful information he can provide. Often, a man does not want to risk his life by staying in place, especially where security is sophisticated. His preference is to defect to safety. In other words, agents in place are harder to come by in systems like the Soviet bloc countries. Defection is more likely. Footnote 20. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 20. Bruce Solly, Disposition, November 25th, 75, page 26 to 27. Resuming the reading. In contrast, agents in place are more easily recruited in so-called third world areas. Within the United States, the interrogation of intelligence service defectors who have defected in the U.S. is primarily responsible of the FBI through the CIA. Though the CIA may have a follow-up session with the individual, sometimes the bona fides of a defector remain disputed for many years. CIA recruited defectors abroad are occasionally brought to the United States and resettled. The FBI is notified, and after the CIA completes its interrogation, FBI may interrogate. CIA does not bring all defectors to the United States, only those expected to make a significant contribution. CIA generally handles resettlement not only of defectors from abroad, but also, at the request of the FBI, of defectors in the United States. 7. The deception. The penetration or double agent is closely related to another important counter-espionage technique, the deception. Simply stated, the deception is an attempt to give the enemy a false impression about something, causing him to take action contrary to his own interests. Fooling the Germans into the belief that D-Day landings were to be in the Pas de Calais rather than in Normandy is a classic example of a successful deception operation in World War II. Footnote 21. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 21. Masterman double-cross system. End of page 171, beginning page 172. Deception is related to penetration because our agents operating within foreign intelligence agencies can serve as excellent channels through which misleading information can flow to the enemy. So double agents serve both as collectors of positive intelligence and channels for deception. However, there are opportunities for deception other than our own agents. In fact, quote, an infinite variety, end quote, exists according to an experienced practitioner. Footnote 23. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 23. CIA Counterintelligence Specialist, Staff Summary, November 1st, 75. Resuming the reading. One example, the U.S. can allow penetration of its own intelligence service and then feed false information through him. 8. Other counterintelligence techniques. Other counter-espionage operations include surreptitious surveillance of various kinds. For instance, audio, mail, physical, and quote, optical, end quote, that is, photography. Interrogation, sometimes incommunicado, as in the case of one defector, and provocation. Decoding clandestine radio transmission and letters with messages written in secret ink between the visible lines is part and parcel of the counter-espionage trade, as is trailing suspected agents, observing, quote, dead drops, end quote, the exchange of material like documents or instructions between a spy and his handler, and photographing individuals entering opposition embassies or at other locations. At the recent funeral of CIA agent Richard Welch, 2 Eastern European diplomats were discovered among the press corps snapping photographs of CIA counterintelligence officers attending the burial ceremony. Footnote 24. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 24. CIA counterintelligence specialist staff summary. January 15th, 76. Resuming the reading. Since the focus of offensive counterintelligence is disruption of the enemy's service, provocation can be an important element of counter-espionage too. It amounts in essence to harassment of the opposition, such as publishing the names of his agents or sending a defector into his midst, who is in reality a double agent. 9. Counterintelligence as an organization. Security at CIA is the responsibility of the Office of Security, a division of the Deputy Director for Administration. Counter-espionage policy is guided by the counterintelligence staff of the Operations Directorate, clandestine service. Besides setting policy, the CI staff sometimes conducts its own operations, though most CI operations emanate directly from the various geographic divisions as the counterintelligence field personnel, through the practice of the counterintelligence discipline, attempt to guard against enemy manipulation of espionage and covert action operations. Structurally, counterintelligence services are usually composed of 2 additional sections which support security and operations. They are the research and the liaison sections. Good research is critical to a good counterintelligence effort, and it may take several forms. It can involve the amassing of encyclopedic intelligence on individuals, including American citizens, associated wittingly or unwittingly with hostile intelligence services. Specialists say that the hallmark of a sophisticated counterintelligence service is its collection of accurate records. Footnote 25. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 25. June 27th, 75. Resuming the reading. Counterintelligence research. There's a double entry. There's a double entry for footnote 25. So the second entry reads IBID, June 27, 75. Resuming the reading. Counterintelligence research personnel also produce reports on topics of interest to the specialty, including guidelines for the interrogation of defectors and current analyses on such subjects as proprietary companies used by, end of page 172, beginning page 173, foreign intelligence services and the structure of Soviet bloc intelligence services. Counterintelligence researchers also analyze defector briefs and, in the case of compromised documents, help ascertain who had access and what damage was inflicted. Liaison with other counterintelligence services, at home and abroad, is also vital, since no effective counterintelligence organization can do its job alone. The various counterintelligence units at home are particularly important, as counterintelligence, with all its intricacies and deceptions, requires coordination among agencies and sharing of records. Unlike the totally unified KGB organization, the American Intelligence Service is fragmented and depends upon liaison to make operations more effective. Coordination between CIA and FBI counterintelligence units is especially critical since, in theory at least, the former has foreign jurisdiction and the latter domestic, yet they must monitor the movements of foreign spies in and out of these two jurisdictions. Sometimes this coordination fails dramatically. In 1970, for example, J. Edgar Hoover of the FBI terminated formal liaison with the CIA and all other intelligence units in the government because of a disagreement with the CIA on a question of source disclosure. The Thomas Reha case, footnote 26. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 26. Staff summary of interview, former FBI liaison person with CIA, August 22nd, 75. Resuming the reading. Liaison with foreign intelligence services overseas can undergo strain too, as one counterintelligence specialist has said, quote, "There are no friendly services. There are services of friendly foreign powers," end quote, footnote 27. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 27. The Roca Disposition, November 25th, 75, page 43. Resuming the reading. Each service fears the other has been infiltrated by hostile agents and is reluctant to see national secrets go outside its own vaults. Nevertheless, cooperation does take place, since all intelligence services seek information and, with precautions, will take it where they can get it if it is useful. The CIA will work with friendly services to uncover hostile intelligence operations, including illegals, directed at the government of the friendly service. For example, a CIA-recruited defector may reveal Soviet agents in a friendly foreign government. This information is shared with the friendly government, if there is proper protection of the source. Protection of the CIA source is paramount. FBI counter-espionage activities within the United States are supervised by a counterintelligence branch of the FBI Intelligence Division. The branch is made up of 4 sections, 3 of which direct field operations conducted by the Bureau's field offices. The 4th handles liaison with other agencies and supervises the FBI's legal attaches assigned to serve in the embassies in several foreign countries. The formal structure for counterespionage coordination between the FBI and the military intelligence agencies was established in 1939 and embodied most recently in a, quote, charter, end quote, for the Interdepartmental Intelligence Conference in 1964. Footnote 27A. Pausing the reading and reading footnote 27A. Confidential memorandum from President Roosevelt to department heads, June 26, 39. Memorandum from Attorney General Kennedy to J. Edgar Hoover, Chairman, Interdepartmental Intelligence Conference, March 5th, 64. Resuming the reading. This formal body, chaired by the FBI Director and including the heads of the military intelligence agencies, has not played a significant decision-making role in recent years. End of page 173. Beginning page 174. And I will stop here for this recording.